Thank you very much, Simon. In terms of the four misconceptions, I was highly tempted to actually talk about number 4 in the Scottish Government, but I'm not going to go there. In terms of maybe number 1, which was around the fiscal regime, we can always look and look at the things that we would like in terms of stability and the things that we wished had been slightly different. But I think one of the senses that I've got recently, last 6 months maybe, but also in these sessions yesterday and today, is I feel like government are actually really, really engaged in terms of the whole thing to do with open for business, supporting business. Now, a lot of that, I think, is to do with the realisation that 450,000 jobs are in the oil and gas industry in the UK. You know, a quarter of the corporation tax comes from the oil and gas sector. But I do just get a sense that senior politicians in the government actually recognise the contribution and the business opportunities. And at times we look at things in a UK context, so 450,000 people working here, but actually UK-based companies are working globally, all over the world. Huge opportunities for education to train and develop people to take them to global careers working all over the world. I think the other piece in terms of Simon's talk there followed on very much from the other 3 around this whole piece around the licence to operate again. So back into that piece around, you know, it's not just about commercialisation and technology, it's about good corporate citizen. It's actually working and building trust. And I think you heard that in every presentation around working, you know, maybe bringing, you know, global technology, global know-how, but actually working locally and building that trust, working with communities, working within the communities in order to share prosperity, provide the solutions to huge demands, but share prosperity as well. So I'd like to thank all our speakers. Hopefully you found the range of the 4 talks interesting. And we are going to open it up now to questions. Hopefully we've got a couple of mics maybe in terms of, so we've got one over here, another one over here. So what would be really useful is if you could put your hand up in terms of asking a question, and it would be helpful if you said who you were, which company, and if you are specifically wanting to address a question to a panel member, then if you could also state that, that would also be helpful. Question over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Edward Sibeme Akigbe from the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. I express my thanks first because I really enjoyed all the speeches, and especially the last one, which dealt with the non-frontier risk, specifically on Africa. I appreciate the speech and down-to-earth analysis of the events in Africa. And it clearly shows that Tullow is actually present in Africa. But my concern, which I think we need assistance, is as of now in Africa, we are gradually having emerging governments. When I mean government now, representing the people, which is a bit different some years ago. And that has a lot to do with what has been going on in respect of risk. I know in my country, Nigeria, we paid so much in terms of risk factor in our contracting process. Now, the assistance which I'm very sure he may have solution, is how do the international oil company, which their business not necessary to go and build hospitals and so on and so forth, or what they call a community development and sustainable development, is how are they at this transition period to real government representing the people, in which people have a say in what they are doing, as business in which oil contributes a lot in my own country? How can they use their advantage position to influence the government so that they themselves, they go purely for their own business and help the country to develop in the right direction in terms of getting benefit, rather than the oil we have is rather a cause rather than it should be a blessing.
Okay.
Thank you.
In terms of who would like to pick that up, I think maybe comment from Simon and Wim, of course, from your involvement in Africa.
I think, as I said in my presentation, that the key here is transparency. If it is possible to track payments, then there is likely to be a much more lively debate about how those funds are being applied. The EITI is clearly a good first step in that, but to some extent that's picking up the problem once the contracts have been agreed. And in fact, I think we all know that quite a lot of the corruption that does occur predates that, in the sense that it is corruption that is related to the licensing rounds themselves, which the EITI doesn't endeavour to address. I think the other issue in terms of the African national oil companies playing a fuller role in driving, as you say, the appropriate use of oil wealth, it comes back to capacity building. And certainly within Tullow, and I'm sure all the other major oil companies would be doing the same thing, we have an active program of seconding people from national oil companies to Tullow, either within the same country or indeed in other African countries, so that they can share experience of what works and what doesn't work. And that's, I think, a big part of it. And then finally is building tailor-made courses so that everybody gets a better understanding of the oil industry in these emerging oil producers. For example, we're running courses for journalists in some of the countries where we've recently discovered oil, because unless you have journalists knowledgeable about the sector and with a basic understanding of the economics, you're not going to have that level of civil debate about how oil wealth should be used in the national interest. And that's clearly vital if oil is going to be a blessing.
I don't know, Wim, would you like to?
Yes, I'd just like to maybe elaborate on the theme of capacity building. There are many different ways of doing that. I mean, it's like transparency, it's like secondment, it's, we have a lot of African colleagues in our operations elsewhere, say in Europe, in the United States, so they see how other people doing it and they bring it back to their own country. But that necessarily means that you really reach institution building, that kind of level. That is very difficult. Shell happens to have a fantastic tool called scenario analysis, scenario planning, and we have in the past, and we still do, invite a wide range of stakeholders in government and communities, say around to actually explore in a scenario type of way what kind of future they want to achieve, right, with their newfound riches or elsewhere, or the problems they have. So we're there then as facilitators, and actually in the thinking process you see that people actually move to very much common ground, and they then see and they agree, even from different political backgrounds, right, what actually is the sensible thing to do. And it all's built on common values what people want to really achieve in the short and long term. And that's another way of, starting the dialogue with communities and stakeholders to really push things forward. And still, at the same time, as a company, we're very firm, right, that we like to bring it to the highest standards as it is.
Okay, thank you. Another question here.
I am from Indonesia, Indorama. We are the manufacturers of PET. I have a question as a downstream for the North Sea. What will be the cost of production for the Arctic oil? It will be below $80 or $125, so it will make our projections that whether this will be workable or not. Thank you.
Okay, who would like to start on that?
Who knows? The only thing I do know is I think it will be expensive to develop the oil and gas resources, probably more expensive than any of the resources that have been developed in the industry to date. The only reason for us to go to the Arctic, apart from the fact that we believe that it's a fundamental part of the future energy supply, is that we can actually make a business there. So the commodity prices have to be sufficient to overcome the costs. So whatever that will be, I think there is a cost challenge in the Arctic. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And I think that's one of the things I alluded to. I think that is, we have some pretty fundamental challenges, as Shell know more than anyone else, in terms of costs of initial drilling programs, so these kind of things. That I think the only way forward is is collaboration on that in order to get these down. But it is for the time being, it's a very, very challenging situation. And I think the proof is in the eating. I think Shell's program in Alaska is going to be absolutely instrumental in terms of the development of the Arctic, and wish them the very best of luck with that. But it's going to be costly, and it's going to take a long time to develop a lot of the resource in the Arctic. It will be a very gradual process.
So that's very much sort of oil, and maybe, Martin, maybe you could give a view on the gas prices now that we're...
Well, I mean, this raises the whole question of what price gas, doesn't it? I mean, as I said, we see gas prices as being very local and regional and not global. So it is possible in this world to have $3 gas in America and $18 gas in Japan at the same time. So, if gas was to be exported from an expensive production zone, it's going to have to be priced at an index and a slope which will generate a return. So, it does make the case, I think, for the longevity, certainly of oil-indexed gas contracts long term, because that's what it costs to develop it. Just because it's $3 in America doesn't mean it's, the cost landed in Tokyo Bay is going to be anything less than the price of oil.
Thank you for that. We've got a question at the back here.
Thanks. My name is Matt Crossman. I'm from Rathbone Investment Management. Questions regarding the viability of development of unconventional oil and gas in Europe, and particularly reflecting on whether the US experience can be replicated here, particularly as regards capacity of oil services companies. Some of the research we've been doing showing that at the height of the Marcellus gas drilling in 2008, there was something in the region of 200 operational drilling rigs onshore, and just in the last couple of months, I believe there was something in the region of only about 70 rigs available in Europe, and most of those were located in Turkey. I just wonder, for the panel in general and perhaps for the chair, is the oil services industry ready and poised to support the likes of Statoil and BG in developing this resource? Thank you.
I mean, from a services perspective, I do think that there is pretty high visibility. I think there is the technology, there is the capabilities. I think there is always a question mark about capacity. And I think that probably came out from a few of the presentations earlier around part of the volatility tends to be in the front end in terms of the capacity there. But from a customer perspective, would anybody like to give a view on that? Martin?
Look, I think this is a very interesting discussion topic. The developments of shale elsewhere than the United States. The question is usually posed with respect to China, which is where people have the most excitement about what may or may not happen. But I think you've just got to remember what you need to make it successful. You need political will. You need the support of local communities, as we've heard amplified with respect to Africa. You need services infrastructure. You need pipeline and takeaway infrastructure and capacity. All of those things, in the main, are absent in most Western European geographies today. And in fact, in some cases, there is, there's a complete ban on the development thereof. And I think the final point one has to remember, what differentiates America from all geographies, particularly European ones, is that the landowner, in most cases, has an economic interest in the development of the commodity. And that makes the whole thing a different bargain. A drilling rig in sight of your house in the Kent or Surrey Hills is one thing, if you've got an economic interest in it. It's quite another if it's just an eyesore that you're going to have to live with by some fit of planning.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe just a quick comment. I think, reflecting a lot on this recently, I think we're making sort of the unconventional business into something much more different than it really is from the onshore conventional business. Yes, there are new technologies with fracking and this kind of thing, but your question specifically to the service engine, to the drilling rigs and these kind of things, well, relative to ultra deep water rigs, these are cheap pieces of kit. So, if the potential's there and if the other things that Martin were talking about are in place, actually sort of materializing enough rigs to do this over a sort of reasonable period of time, in my mind, is not the big issue. It's not a big issue at all. We've done it before. We did that tens and tens of years ago with conventional onshore exploration in a lot of these countries. So I think there's some kind of misnomer or conception about sort of this part. I think it's very much more about what Martin's saying than it is about the lack of services or lack of drilling rigs and these kind of things. Because I think if you can get the other things in place, then that will fix itself.
Okay, question down here.
Hi, my name's Chris Barton. I'm with KBR. Martin, this is geared towards you with respect to LNG. As you know, there's a lot of projects currently under construction. There's a number of projects on the drawing board that are either in the pre-FEED or the FEED stage for onshore, as well as FLNG. How do you see the supply-demand situation going into the future once these projects come online in 2015, 2016? Do you see demand keeping up with supply, or do you think there'll be an oversupply, and will that impact pricing significantly in your mind?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm not at all a subscriber to the notion that we have a glut of gas in any dimension. And I think if you take pieces from all of the presentations we've heard right from the outset this morning, we've talked about this huge increase in demand for hydrocarbons, and of course gas is just a part of that. Our view is that if you look at global gas growth, 2.5% for the sake of argument, going forward, with much higher demand growth in the emerging economies and lower in the established ones, and if you look at supply projects on the blocks, and if you look at production decline, actually the task for this industry to develop what is required by 2020, for instance, is equivalent to 9 Norways, just to put it in perspective. So the industry's got to develop 9 Norways between now and 2020. I mean, that's a formidable task. Now, we've also heard about today the issues around the development of resources, higher cost, more complexity, the license to operate, all of which are challenging projects right from the outset. So whilst it is possible to look at the North American gas opportunity, whilst it's possible to look at the East African gas opportunity, the development of those resources is going to take much longer and is going to be much more difficult than people give credit to. So the short answer to your question is we see demand dragging supply, screaming behind it, and actually supply not being able to keep up. And specifically in LNG, it would be our view that the world is short, it will stay short, and it will continue to be short. And that's a challenge for the supply side. The demand is going to lead.
Is that shared by some of our other panel members there? Wim, maybe?
Well, happy to add, yes, indeed, the latent demand for natural gas, for all the hydrocarbons, especially for natural gas, is very high. And you even see, say, in the past, when there was a recession, you think, oh, well, OECD has less demand, so there's a surplus. But you see straight away that all that surplus is taken up by the non-OECD, and they never give it back. So the non-OECD market, especially China, can be seen as an unlimited sink. If that gas is available, they really need it. And the coast regions have all these facilities, say, to actually, they will build them sufficiently to absorb that gas. And also I'd like to highlight, actually, when you look at what kind of market segments this gas will go to in Asia Pacific, and let's take China as an example, that's not necessarily power, where it competes with coal. Actually, it goes to the high value markets, into industry, in the residential area, services. And I said, probably we expect that the demand in China is probably going to grow fourfold at least by 2040. And then still, it hardly makes any inroads in power. It really goes into the higher segment market. So if China is serious about reducing, say, the CO2 emissions, and now she wants more gas in the power sector as well, then the demand would grow even faster. But again, it's more their political being comfortable with it, how much import they want to have compared to domestic production, how much a share of their total energy system is that. That is more a political decision than actually purely from a market demand pull side.
Thank you. Well, I think it's been a fascinating session. I think our speakers have covered subjects that are very much around frontier in lots of different ways in terms of technology, geography, commercialization, and around the whole challenge around continuing to push the boundaries on a license to operate. Hopefully you found it just as fascinating as I did. And I would like to thank Martin, Wim, Tim and Simon for, I think, real thought-provoking presentations. And I'd like to draw this to a close. And if you could maybe give our speakers one last round of applause. Thank you.